All right, so now we're going to talk about child abuse and neglect. This is something that nobody ever wants to talk about. Nobody wants to have to deal with. Guys, the fact of the matter is you're going to encounter this in some shape or form during your career in EMS. It's just going to happen, okay? So what's the definition of abuse? I'm sure we all have... All right, I'm sure we all have kind of our own thoughts or ideas about what we would consider abuse. But here's kind of what it is. Improper excessive action so as to injure or cause harm. Okay? That's different than discipline. Okay? All right.
Look at it working so good.
All right. Now, what is neglect? Actually, it's not basically neglect talks about not. Yes. Neglect can be emotional, mental, physical, you name it. Okay? Neglect is basically not attending to the needs of the child. You will find babies. Some babies get deemed failure to thrive. Now, there's lots of reasons for failure to thrive. There are medical reasons as well. So I don't want you to think that every failure to thrive baby is an abused baby. But they've actually found that babies need love, connection, touching, stimulus to thrive appropriately, to grow. So you cannot just feed the baby, diaper the baby, and leave them alone. They do require that interaction for successful growth and development. Okay? Anyway, all right? So here's what I want you to understand. So when we think of child abuse, what do you think of?
Locking them in a closet, not feeding them.
But also there's the emotional abuse.
There's sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse. So most of what you've talked about is physical abuse and sexual abuse.
Putting your child down, telling them they're not good enough, they're never going to amount to anything.
Absolutely. That's a big deal.
You catch that story on Yahoo? It was on Yahoo.com of a woman. She was going to go to a job interview, so she bolted her kids in the room, and then the house caught fire and killed the 2 kids. And she was just saying, I did that because I didn't want them to mess up the house while I was gone. And I couldn't find the upset. And she bolted the door shut.
I've heard lots.
You would be amazed at how many times that type of thing happens. She didn't intend on causing harm to her children. And especially in some...
and it wasn't the first time. Cops told her.
Yeah, in some situations. Okay, we'll get to that a little bit. So when you think of neglect, clearly, or I'm sorry, when you guys think of abuse, clearly you think of physical abuse, sexual abuse. Guess what? Neglect is the #1 type of abuse in this country. Hands down. Without question. Failure to provide for the needs of the child. Okay? Now, Ashley had a very good question. She said, I heard that Bell County is the #1 for child abuse. And I can tell you, that is incorrect information. However, we are the 5th highest in this state. Now, we are talking about populations like Fort Hood, San Antonio, Houston. And Bell County is the 5th highest in the state.
I'm glad I wasn't raised here.
Okay? Think you won't deal with it? Think one of your kids isn't going to school if you go to school here in Bell County with children that suffer abuse and neglect? See what?
I was joking.
That kid that shot himself was bullied, from what I understand. It is not uncommon these days. Okay? See, one of the talks that I try to have with my kids, because they're at each other all the time, right? They do this, and the world is going to bring you down enough That's not what you need to have at home, regardless from whomever it's from, right? So, see how many of the types you hit. You got physical abuse, you got emotional abuse, right? Sexual abuse and neglect, okay? This happens in all socioeconomic backgrounds. It happens in all ethnicities. Nobody is exempt from the possibility of abuse, wholeheartedly, okay? Let's see. The reason we do this, right, and I teach a lot of different classes, okay, and one of the things that I'm very passionate about is child abuse and neglect. Seen it entirely too many times. It's heartbreaking, okay? We are advocates for not just our patients, but for people in general, humanity, what's happened to this world. What I have found was people who went to school, back when I went to school, I would go, I kind of pick on some of the older providers and say, how much education did you get on child abuse and neglect? I don't remember if I got any. It's commonly what I hear. You have to know. You have to know how to recognize it. You have to have this suspicion. You have to know what to look for. Otherwise, we can't do the right thing. So when I say neglect is the highest, number one, cause or type of abuse in this country, do you think they're going to call you and say, I've neglected my child?
Oh, no.
Do you think you're even going to be on the scene for the kid?
No, you're probably going to be there for the parent.
For somebody else, right? So, prime example, one of the calls that I had, and I've hotlined a couple times. One of the calls that I had that I kind of said, I think I need a hotline, and it wasn't because they were intentionally trying to harm this child. It was a 9-year-old little girl who was clearly, when I say malnourished, she wasn't really malnourished. She lived with her great-grandmother who was excessive of like 90, 92 years old. Okay? Mom was out of the picture. Grandma lived next door, but she lived with great-grandma. So how much do you think great-grandma was able to either clean the house, take care of things, cook to provide healthy, appropriate meals for her?
She wasn't probably able to. She probably couldn't even do those things for herself.
I had went out there several times to this call, to this location, and kind of my final straw was, Grandma was sick. And I had been there enough, and the little girl was she's a very sweet child. She's kind of needy, kind of clingy. She remembered me from when I was there before. So inevitably I show up because Grandma is sick, and this was absolutely an unintentional thing. There's human fecal matter all over because Grandma had such bad diarrhea she couldn't control her bowels. All over. Nobody's cleaning it up. The child's not cleaning it up. I'm looking in the kitchen. There's no food for her to eat because Grandma's been sick. Who can go take care of her? Absolutely, this is when I hotlined. And this was unintentional neglect. Nonetheless, sometimes what they need is education. Or maybe me calling in this neglect is all it takes for somebody to get them the resources that they need to care for one another. Absolutely. I am an advocate for get your resources out there.
Hell, she could have died. Then the girl would have been there by herself.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay? So we have to be able to recognize these problems. We have to look for the not obvious sometimes. So when I'm on a scene, something doesn't seem right, and I'm not there for the kid, but I'm looking at the kid, something doesn't seem right, I'm still obligated to call and report that. We are mandated reporters in this room. If for no other reason, if you can't think about humanity and doing the right thing for the people that we're, coexisting with.
You just call Child Protective Services?
Yes, you do. Okay? And you can actually even do it online if it's not a high acuity patient.
Are you serious?
Yes.
I've only had to call them once.
Every single call gets investigated. Every single one. Based on the information you get is going to tell them how quickly they need to investigate. That's the big difference. Okay? So, let's talk about some signs and symptoms of abuse. Multiple bruises in various stages of healing. I want you to know that a child can have a terrible bruise and it can be not even hardly visible to the naked eye within 2 to 3 days. So if they have various stages of healing in bruises, this is an ongoing, continuous problem. This isn't an isolated event.
do you look at like where the bruises are? Like
We're gonna get into that.
Like if a kid falls a lot or is outside and playing.
My kids are really rambunctious. They have really bad.
It's going to depend on the location a lot. Okay. So injuries inconsistent with the story, what's being told. Okay. Repeated calls to the same address. A lot of times these people seek treatment at various facilities. So they may go Temple once, they may go Metroplex once, maybe they go to Seton in Heights next time, maybe they go to Darnell the time after that.
So you're saying they hurt their children and then take them in for treatment?
Sometimes.
They know they're doing wrong.
Sometimes. So they don't take them initially. So if a kid gets burned, they typically don't go for the burn, they go for the infection.
Okay. I see.
Okay? And that's what you're going to find. So if they seem inappropriately unconcerned, conflicting stories, either both parents or the parents and the children, it's important to separate them, question them separately. Fear on the part of the child to kind of discuss how they were injured. Caregivers' actions, are they inappropriate? And we're talking interactions with both the child and me. Okay? And then do the child look to the parents for reassurance? You know, again, when our kids are sick or they're hurt, they come to us. We reassure them it's going to be better. We take care of them. If the child doesn't do that, there's a reason. Okay? You said something a second ago. Ashley, what did you say?
I asked, like, you know, I was a clumsy kid. I hurt myself all the time, and my parents never laid a hand on me. So my question is, you know, if I got all these bruises on my knees and stuff, I mean, I was always outside riding bikes, climbing trees.
We'll talk about locations.
Okay.
So a delay in seeking care is often a sign of abuse and neglect. Are you awake? Okay, so a delay in seeking care is a potential sign. All right? 2, so don't forget that. Some signs of neglect: lack of adult supervision, malnourished appearing child, unsafe living conditions, okay, or untreated chronic illnesses. So asthmatic with no meds is a good indicator. It's important to find out, why do they not have meds? If they tell me he lost his job, we are about to lose the house, we didn't have the money, we're eating beans and cornbread already, right? This is absolutely the place for me to go, we need to make some interventions here. CPS, is that really what we need to do?
No.
No, absolutely not. But I do need to transport the kid because they need treatment for their medical stuff. And I'm going to go talk to the social worker and go, hey, look, there are programs out there that can help this family get or pay for meds. We need to find them. That's what your social workers are great at. They are a great liaison for helping us. Okay? But an unattentive, and you'll be there. You'll be there with somebody who's smoking cigarettes in an unkept house around a child that has asthma with no medications, and they seem like they're not even in, and you'll be over here taking care of the kid, and they're going to be sitting there smoking their cigarette, watching TV. That is not an exaggeration. That will happen. That is a sign of neglect. Okay, well, those are all signs of neglect, are they not? Okay. So now let's talk about some patterns of physical abuse or injury. What kids are at high risk, you think?
Infants. Also, I would even think toddlers, because they start getting into stuff.
Absolutely.
And they start saying no, and they stop doing what they're supposed to
So,
do.
yes. What else happens in those ages, in those toddler ages? Start potty training. It is not uncommon to see burns related to potty training accidents. Okay? So, you see how this isn't as burned? Do you know why?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you call a donut burn. Okay? This child was probably put in a hot bath and held on the bottom of the cold porcelain tub. So whatever's touching the tub isn't going to have the same degree of burn as everywhere else.
Why would you do that?
These kids also have clear demarcation lines. When they talk about gloving or stocking injuries, those are dipping injuries. They'll dip hands and feet into hot water to teach them, I said no. You know, most of us kind of smack our kid's hand. Okay? But dipping. These kids also, when they go into the bathtub, there doesn't tend to be splatter marks because it's kind of paralyzing the pain that they get. So they don't a lot of times thrash around.
How long would they sit in that? You would think if you're going to use that, it would be a quick dip in and dip out. If you would use that technique, would they sit in there for hours?
I'm not sure I understand your logic for that.
She just say she doesn't understand how they can just stand there and hold their child like that.
Thank you, that's
like,
great.
ooh, you know.
Well, because a lot of times it's they're anxious, they're angry.
Well, would you dip your stuff into hot water if you did
That's
something
what I
wrong?
said. I don't understand the purpose of doing it, but if you're going to do it, like, how long would it take for a baby to be in a hot tub to get that kind of...
Depends on how hot the water is.
No, I'm...
It depends on how hot the water is.
Okay.
Okay. And clearly, what? Look at this baby right here.
It looks like they just stuck into the stove almost, except there's no circling line.
It's circumferential. Because then they're going to tell you, get out of your house, you're not taking care of their kid, and now you're waiting for PD to get there, and what are they doing to that kid in the house while you're standing out here helpless and waiting?
So,
What do you notice about this kid? This is important, you guys. What do you notice about this kid?
some is white and some is red?
I'm not talking about the injury.
Oh, I don't know that.
It is an infant. What do infants get into that are going to burn them like this?
Nothing.
So his developmental stage doesn't support an accidental injury like this. Do you see what I'm saying? Well,
Grab up the stove.
he doesn't have any splash lines. So that's one of the things you look at, right? Sean, if your 4-year-old pulls down some hot, you're cooking soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, whatever, and your 4-year-old grabs a hold of the pot and falls and it pours on her, what is the first thing you're going to do? You're going to grab her. So if I go into the house and they tell me that this kid grabbed a hold of a hot thing, I'm going to make my way to the kitchen, because any parent that's going to clean up the mess on the floor before they take care of their kid, that's a delay in seeking treatment. That is a problem. That also indicates to me that it probably didn't happen that way. It doesn't kind of fit. There's no splash line, so look for that. Also, if she says, I was holding my baby, and they got into the pot of water, okay? I'm just telling you. So stories that doesn't match either the child's development or the injury. So, child, 3 months old. They tell you the baby's unresponsive, having seizures, etc. They tell you the baby rolled off of the sofa onto the carpeted floor and is now like this.
That doesn't make sense. You have to hit something harder than that for a baby to have seizures like that.
Okay, how high was the sofa and what did they fall on? Sure.
But if you're not rolling off the sofa,
My child rolled over the first day she was born in the warmer.
well, yeah, but you should be watching the child anyways.
It just shows the inattention, like your attention is not on your baby.
Well, I've known a lot of
Can you have a head injury from a fall off the sofa onto a carpet?
No.
No. That does not match. Come to my house, I have hardwood or tile. My bed, you have to go up steps to get to. She takes a head dive off the bed. Could that cause it? Sure.
When I went to security, we had this one thing come in. It was the parents had said that it had rolled off its bed in the middle of the night, and they never checked on it or anything, and apparently it died in its sleep. And whenever the EMTs got there, they asked her if they wanted her, or if she wanted them to do CPR and try to, see if they could resuscitate when there wasn't any obvious sign he was dead. They're just like, no, just leave it, it's fine. And then whenever she got to the hospital, then they were all like, yeah, they dead and everything. And then she started crying, like, oh, my baby. And then all the EMTs were all like, dude, we're trying to say that you said no.
One of the first babies I took care of, and I can tell you his name, but it would be a HIPAA violation, was a premature, and he had, I think it was trisomy 8. Anyway, he had a genetic disorder, and they're higher risk categories, right? So you got to think of your kids' age. So how much are they into stuff? How high is the demand? Can I, how much attention do they need? Are they into everything? Are they home with me all the time? Do I get a break? Do they go to school? Right? Are they missing a lot of school? That would be another question. But any kids with special health care needs are high risk. Now remember, that involves your ADHD kids too, or your ADD kids. Okay? Absolutely involves them. But so this baby was high risk anyway, because he was born with defects. And he had been shaken several times, and I think I probably told you guys this. He was shaken by Dad. And when they finally went to arrest Dad, he was still living at home with Mom. Mom didn't come up to see the baby at the hospital. I took care of this child in the hospital. And Dad shook him so much that he fractured his arm, and his cast fit entirely in my hand, and it was a full arm cast. Okay, and it fit in my arm. And he was a sweet little baby. And the aunt of the mother and her family used to come up. They were from a neighboring town there in Kansas City. And they used to come up and visit the baby all the time, all the time, all the time. And because the dad was arrested and taken out of the home, the baby was having seizures and whatnot because he had been shaken several times. We had to give Mom training because they give them training for high-risk babies. And we sent him home with her.
Mom was the one doing it.
No.
No?
And I kind of looked at the nurse with a heavy heart, and I said, do you ever think we're maybe sending this kid home to die? He did pass away. And I'm not sure, I think if I remember right, it was from a seizure, from a prolonged seizure, which is part of his medical condition. Mom did not call 911. Mom loaded the baby up and drove him to the local funeral home. Okay. So, that's pretty blatant. It's not always going to be as blatant as that. Remember, there are shock values as well. A lot of mothers or fathers have this shock value. They, my kid is dead. They're in denial. No, it's going to be okay. Take him to the hospital. It's fine. Remember our 5 stages of grieving. Okay? You can encounter any one of those. Okay? So, this injury doesn't match the age. This indicates that the baby was held in water. Okay? And again, those type of genital burns are not uncommon for a child who's potty trained and had an accident and now they've got to get cleaned up.
What is the white on the baby of the child? Skin? Is that skin?
Mm-hmm.
Just shine?
Yep. Yep. So, some patterns of abuse. You got to watch for bruises on the trunk. Okay, typically it's those kind of injuries. If they're on the forearms, not as much, right? Because we fall into stuff. Okay, typically they try to put their hands down. Knees, heads, depending on if they're walking. Watch the kiddo. If they're walking and they kind of lean with their head because they're, again, that big bobblehead, it's not uncommon for kids to get bumps and bruises on the head, on the knees, kind of stuff. The trunk, abnormal. Abnormal. Okay? Extreme malnutrition, and what they're showing you here is look at how thin this child is. Electric cord marks, you got to watch. So when you enter a room, look around. Here in EMS, we have this divine privilege, if you will. And you won't always think of it as a privilege. We're invited into these people's homes most of the time. We have that privilege to see things in the way that they are when they call. The doctors at the ER, the nurses at the ER, the social workers, they don't see that. So we need to do a very good job of documenting what we see. If it looks like an extension cord or a phone cord with the coils, was there one laying around that you saw? Did they yank that cord off the lamp and whoop them with the lamp cord because it was what was accessible? Was it a wire hanger? Look at some of these.
That's a wire hanger.
Well, I don't know. But it could be. Cigarette burns. Now look, I am a child of a smoker, okay? It wasn't uncommon for me to run into my mom's cigarette because I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. That's an isolated occurrence, every so often. We're talking cigarette burns or even human bite marks. Human bite marks, okay? And I'm not even sure, I don't know why that is. It looks like almost like an avulsion, like it was kind of cut off. But look, so different stages of healing. Look at that one versus this one and this one. Look, different shapes. So watch your patterns. This, I don't know what that could be. See how it's round here and here? Can y'all see that? Maybe. And then look, this is a different pattern yet. Okay? All right. It would be, yeah, it would be just like quick.
It wouldn't be like a circle. Yeah.
It's like the holding it on there while it burns them. Yeah, absolutely. Human bite marks, multiple fractures, and can y'all let me try this. Now can you see the bruises on that baby's face? I've had everything from the baby wouldn't take the bottle. It's really common for frustrated parents that smack the baby in the mouth with the bottle to get injuries up here inside the upper lip. Okay? I took care of a kid that continuously had something shoved down its throat and pulled back out because it wouldn't take its bottle. Bruising, you can see it. One of the last cases, my last night at Children's was a very difficult night. So I worked a 6-year-old rollover who died. I worked a 9-year-old, 9, he was 9. 9-year-old that was shot with a .22 and died. And I worked an 18-month-old kid that great-grandparents brought him in because he wasn't using his arm. He was 18 months old. Born to a blind mother, and the father was somebody she had met online kind of thing. She had resources because she was very close to her mother and her grandmother especially. But the mother lived alone and cared for the child because, you know, it's not uncommon for blind folks to be completely, you know, independent. So she lived alone and she took care of her child. But the grandparents kind of had him, or the great-grandparents actually, had him for a day. He was crying a lot and he wasn't using his arm. So they took him to a different hospital, and the hospital kind of said, no, it's not broken, send him home. A couple days went by and he still was struggling and crying and wouldn't use his arm, so they brought him to us. So as we start looking, his arm is fractured. In fact, he had fractures on every extremity. One of them was a spiral fracture, and that's from where she had grabbed the leg and kind of twisted it out. That twisting motion, okay, causes a lot. It takes a lot of force to do that. He had scratch marks on his scrotum. He had fingerprint. You could match up the fingerprint to this child's arm where he was snatched up by his arm. It was horrific. Because we have to do, they just looked at the arm. They kind of probably sent him to fast track, quite honestly. Yeah. But because we had to kind of completely disrobe, we started seeing one sign. He had to go for a scan. He had broken fingers and a foot and leg. It was in various stages of healing, rib fractures you could see that were kind of getting better and getting worse kind of thing. It was a long night. Well, because she controls when they see him. So it was in various stages of healing, so this happens. So, oh, I'm sorry, we're busy today.
How can she see if the bruising's gone?
Well, no, but you know how the child behaves.
Oh.
You know when your kid is hurt.
She's blind and she's
Okay. Facial bruising. Again, it's not uncommon to see patterns of bruise. So most of the time what I saw a lot of times was they would go, it was typically a divided home, not always, but a lot of times it was a divided home, and they would go to the other parents, and then they would come home, and they would go, hey, look, I found this, or I found that. So we'd be doing a whole workup. Okay. Some signs that mimic abuse that this is not abuse, technically. Okay? So there's Mongolian spots, and this typically happens on African American babies. Okay? And a lot of times they had it on their butt, or just over their butt. It looks like a little bruise, it's just darker pigmentation A lot of times they outgrow it. Okay. Cupping. Cupping, and I believe these are both, I think, Asian and Hispanics who do this. So cupping is where they basically take kind of a thing of alcohol and they light it, and then they kind of flip it over, and it causes like a suction. It's kind of how it works. And the idea is they're trying to remove the respiratory ailments, if you will. This one is where they take a coin and they put it in oil, warm oil, and then they just rub it on the child, and it creates that friction. And so it'll look like a bruise. They're not injuring their child. Okay, that is again it's old holistic rituals that they believe is kind of removing the respiratory ailments most of the time. Okay. Yeah.
They used to do like
A TENS unit is a lot the same thing. If you ever had a TENS unit when they used the old cups, it would do the same thing.
oh, it was like I think it was like a bee sting or something. They used to do it to try and like remove it, or like if the bug bites, like the poisons in it, they would try and remove it that way. Wherever.
Ineffectively, but yes, probably. So risk factors. Younger children, younger than the age 5 typically, because again, they start school at this age. So it's much more difficult to kind of contain or watch. Drug or alcohol abuse of the parents. Okay. History of domestic violence, and then family history of maltreatment. It also is not uncommon for, usually it's a child. So if they have multiple children, a lot of times it's going to be a particular child that gets the brunt of it most of the time.
Why do they do that?
There's something about the child. So maybe he was defending his mom, or maybe mom said, don't hit him, hit me. So especially a lot of little boys try to go to mom's rescue. So that's where it plays into the domestic violence. Otherwise, it could be maybe the child is that difficult child. Maybe you look like somebody, like maybe you look like your father and I'm your stepdad kind of thing. Okay?
Gotcha.
I don't know. Okay, there's reasons to suspect, but do you ever really know? Okay? So what are we going to do? Communicate the need for transport to the caregiver or parent. Avoid confrontations. This is going to delay transport, and again, it could put this child in harm's way and make it much more difficult to find out the real story. Wholeheartedly, hands down. I would never even let them know I suspect anything. And it's difficult. You got to make sure, remember that body language and your facial expressions. You got to be able to maintain that, and this is where it's going to be difficult, I'm telling you. But if you create a friction in that environment, you are working against yourself, and you are not working in the best interest of that child, hands down.
So you leave the child there and transport the parent?
What?
I thought that's what you were saying.
No.
Okay.
No.
I got confused.
Yeah. No. So avoid confrontation with caregivers. Okay. Be non-judgmental and avoid accusations. Again, who is at the house? Oh, mom said I just got home from the store and the baby's not acting very well. Oh, how long were you at the store? Oh, who kept the baby? Dad. Well, where's Dad at now? He left. Okay. So when did it really happen? Just because the person that called you is standing in front of you and they're a caregiver doesn't mean that they're the ones that are responsible. Okay, doesn't mean that they're not either. Okay, consider law enforcement for assistance, and then transport to ensure the safety of the patient. If you need to get law enforcement involved because nobody's going to consent to transport, then do so early. Okay, so 4 key duties. Suspect. So you have to recognize some suspicious circumstances, provide appropriate medical care and transport the patient, of course. Communicate appropriately with the family. That is difficult at times. Okay? You still have got to do it. All right? And then document. This is some of the most important. You have to document your findings. In EMS, we do a great job. We have this gut feeling. And look, I can go, that kid is abused. I have this gut feeling. There's a feeling in my gut that makes me that way. There is something that I have seen or witnessed that led to that gut feeling. So the conditions of the house, the interactions of the parents, the lack of attentiveness, the changing of the stories, those are the things that give me that gut feeling that we, as providers, have to do a good job at documenting in our report. So when we talk about our documentation goes to court, guys, it doesn't just go to court to save our butt if there's some question about did we do the right thing or not. It goes to court in cases like this to determine whether that kid should go home to this family or not. So documentation is extremely important. Okay? Legal aspects, we are required to document. Now, I have this question from actually quite a seasoned firefighter not very long ago. He's a firefighter paramedic, and I said, you are required, you are mandated by law if you suspect abuse or neglect to call, period. And we're free from any lashing out as long as we act in good faith. So now look, if you're calling on your ex all the time just to be kind of a bother, that's not okay. All right? What I'm talking about here is it's not our place. It's not our place to determine. It's not my place to investigate. Once I have that suspicion, I call it CPS's job to investigate and make some determinations. Okay? But you have to be careful. Will they know EMS called? There's a good possibility. Does that mean that next time when somebody needs EMS in the house that they won't call? Maybe. So you've got to have supporting evidence, supporting reason. So one of these firefighters said to me, so when I go over here to said apartments at 3 a.m., where they're in a bad part of town, and I go to these apartments, and there's a 3-year-old running around or 2-year-old running around in a diaper without supervision, and there's all the kids that are from this apartment complex, not just this building, running loose without supervision at 3 a.m., does that mean I should call every time I go there? And I said, heck yes, it does. That is neglect. That is not providing for the welfare of that child. You bet. I absolutely believe you should. If you're sitting here telling me they're not taking care of their children, they're not providing what they need to provide, then yes, it is neglect. Does anybody in here disagree with that?
No.
Okay. So in summary, be an advocate for the child, okay? And notice it doesn't say for the patient. Again, think about your neglect situations. It may not be the patient that you're there for, okay? Consider the possibility of child maltreatment, okay? Document. Do not document feelings. Do not document thoughts, okay? Be subjective. What did you see? What did you watch? What did you witness? How did dad interact? Who was on scene? Who wasn't on scene? When did the kids start acting like this? This is all documentation stuff that's important. Yes, in quotes. Yep. But I want you to be careful because they can go through legal and get your document. They have the right to that. The parents do. You're right. My point to you with that is the child said, my dad knocked me down the stairs. Dad gets a run of that, gets a copy of that report. What do you think happens from there for the kid?
Well, that child goes down that stair a little bit faster.
Depends. It really depends. Was there supporting evidence? Did CPS take them or not take them? Some CPS doesn't take them because there's this theory, there's this thought. Is it better to take an abused child out of the home, or is it better to educate the parents, give them the resources they need? Is it more detrimental for the child's mental and emotional well-being to leave them in the home with the family or not?
I don't understand that at all.
Yes. Well, no, I'm not telling you not to document.
Be selective in your words.
You're absolutely right. So can you document just that? You need to make sure you have appropriate supporting evidence, I guess is what I'm telling you. You know, and yes, mom stated, dad stated. Did they give you different stories? Okay? That is stuff that you do need to document. Just make sure you're subjective about it. Okay? Report suspicions of maltreatment to the ED staff. I once asked, and I talk to literally the entire chain before I leave the hospital if I suspect non-accidental trauma or abuse. I kind of tell the nurse, hey, look, this is what I think. This is what I think is going on. I go to the doctor, hey, doc, this is what I think. This is what's going on. I'm hotlining this. I go to the social worker, hey, I'm hotlining this. And a social worker once told me, absolutely, everybody involved should hotline. So if you're there and you think that it's abuse, and you're there and you think it's abuse, and you're there as either partners, and Sean is your firefighter, and all three of you think it's abuse, you shouldn't leave it up to one of you to report that. All three of you need to report it. Okay? Ensure that law enforcement or child protective services are notified. Again, child protective services is our best bet. You can either call them. There's a 1-800 number. You can hotline anytime. That's why they call it hotlining. Or you can go online and do an online report. Now, it's going to ask you some very specific questions. They're going to want to know, did they have utilities? Was there running water? Was there electricity? Did they have food? You know, be careful about saying things like the house was filthy or the house was dirty, because your idea of filth or dirt is different than their idea of filth or dirt. So you need to, what did you see? Okay? And then during this process, if you answer one of those questions that kind of raises those red flags, they're predetermined. So if you answer one of those, it's going to tell you, stop this report, immediately call this number. Okay, and that's based on the acuity. Questions? What time is it, guys?